Minitab for Chapter 14. We're going to use the data set for the textbook, and we're going to look at why people vote or don't vote in elections. And the first question asks you to think about relationships between the dependent variable percent of the population voting and two independent variables of your choice that represent education, poverty, unemployment, crime, or income. And we're going to use interval data. So I'm going to work with the variable percent of the population voting, which is in column C27, and the SAT grand total. And here are my hypotheses. As the SAT scores increase, the percent of the population voting will increase. And the null hypothesis is going to be there is no relationship between the SAT scores and the percent of the population voting. The first question, the next part of the problem, of the assignment, asks us to create a scatter plot for each variable, and do they fit a linear model, why or why not. So I'm going to go into Minitab, which I've already opened up, and I'm going to go ahead and go to Graph, Scatter Plot, Simple, and I've already set up my Y variable is the percent of the population voting, and my X variable, which was in column C27, and the grand SAT total, which is in column C21. Go ahead and identify the Y and the X variable, and then select OK. And I'll see a graph of the data. And it looks like as the SAT score grand total is increasing, there is an increase in the percentage of the population voting. And it's a somewhat linear relationship. So we can move on to the next part of the problem, which asks us to obtain the regression equation for those variables. So I'm going to go back to Minitab, and I'm going to close down this graph, and I'm going to go to Stat, Regression, and Fit Regression Model. And I'm going to specify my response variable, which is going to be the percent of the population voting, which was in column C27. And then I'm going to select my predictor variable, and I'm using the SAT grand total. And if I go ahead and select results, I have some options to specify here, and I would just go with the method, the model summary, coefficients, and the regression equation. And then OK. And in my output window, I see that I've got the regression output, I've got the R squared, I've got the regression table, and I've got the equation of the regression line. So I can go ahead and answer the questions in this part of the assignment. And then the regression equation, again, is going to appear at the bottom of the output right here. And then how well is the relationship described? A bilinear model, and you're going to use the regression output to answer part E and F. And then in the second part of the assignment, you're going to create a model that includes 4 to 5 independent variables and a multiple regression design of your choice. So first you want to write this model verbally, and then you want to go ahead and specify the relationship. Now I'm going to use the per pupil expenditures in column C19 as my response variable, and then several independent variables: public school final enrollment, public school faculty, SAT grand total, and the mean household income. I'm going to have 4 independent variables, and I'm going to predict that the expenditures have a direct relationship with all 4 independent variables. So let's go over here. I'm going to go again to Stat, Regression, Fit Regression Model. And again, this time I'm going to do this expenditure per pupil, which is in column C19 as my dependent variable. And then I had a series of independent variables that I said I was going to use. And they included public school final enrollment, public school faculty, the SAT grand total that we were using before, and then an income variable, and I chose to use the mean household income, which is up here in C40. And again, let's look at the results, and we're going to probably use the same output that we specified in the previous part of the assignment. And then OK. And you're going to have quite a large amount of output here. Again, the regression equation is down here at the bottom. Here's my R squared, a little bit less than 27%. Here's my table. Here's my T for each of the parameters in the model. And if I notice two of these really don't look like they're doing very much for us. The SAT grand total doesn't have a very small p-value. Neither does the income variable. And again, you can talk about what you see here, whether or not you think all these should be included. One thing that's interesting on this model is that the final enrollment has a negative coefficient. So you might want to think about what that means in the context of this model.